the first time since the Second World War, Japanese combat troops are training on Philippine soil, not as observers, not as humanitarian workers, as armed soldiers running live defensive operations. That alone would be a remarkable headline, but it is only the beginning of what is quietly becoming one of the most significant military partnerships in Asia. Japan's Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi flew to Manila earlier this month. He watched combat drills. He met with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., and he left with something on the table that nobody expected to move this fast: a plan to transfer Japanese Navy destroyers to the Philippines, not new ships. 6 Abukuma-class destroyer escorts vessels that have served Japan's maritime self-defense force for more than 3 decades. That's the detail that matters. These are real warships. The question is not just what Japan is giving. The question is what Japan is building. Japan will deploy combat-capable units to this, U.S. Balikatan military exercises, the annual Philippines-United States drills, marking the first time since World War II that Japanese combat troops have set foot on Philippine soil in that capacity. Let that land for a moment. Japan's post-war constitution has kept its military on an extraordinarily short leash for 80 years. This is a country that still officially calls its armed forces a self-defense force. And yet here they are, weapons in hand, training for war on foreign soil. Japanese units in Balikatan 2026 are now participating in training scenarios involving defensive operations while carrying weapons. A significant departure from previous roles while carrying weapons, which had been limited largely to observers or personnel involved in humanitarian assistance. This shift did not happen overnight. In mid-2024, Japan and the Philippines signed the Reciprocal Access Agreement, which allows the deployment of forces of either country to the other's territory for joint and larger combat exercises, including live-fire drills. The agreement took effect in September 2025. In January of this year, the two countries went further. Japan and the Philippines signed an acquisition and cross-servicing agreement, a military logistical pact allowing tax-free sharing of supplies during joint training. Now comes the destroyer transfer. Each agreement has built on the last. This is not improvisation. This is architecture. Japanese troops were recently permitted to train on Philippine soil in a full combat capacity following the implementation of the Reciprocal Access Agreement, a treaty that grants Japan the same access to the Southeast Asian archipelago for drills as the United States and Australia. To appreciate what that means, consider who Japan now stands alongside in the Philippines. The United States has been there for decades. Australia has had a visiting forces agreement since 2012. Japan has just joined that tier. That is not a routine development. To understand why this is happening, you have to zoom out. At the center of this year's exercises stands Balikatan 2026, described as the largest combat exercise stage in Southeast Asia, prepared as a multi-domain war rehearsal involving land, sea, air, cyber, and space operations. Recent iterations have taken place in the northernmost Batanes Islands, just across the Bashi Channel from Taiwan, where U.S. and Philippine forces have deployed anti-ship missile systems and rehearsed amphibious landings. The geography there is not incidental. The Bashi Channel sits between the Philippines and Taiwan. It is one of the most strategically sensitive choke points in the Indo-Pacific. Control that channel in a conflict, and you control access to the Pacific itself. For Japan, access to the Philippines means something very specific: protection of critical sea lanes, including the Bashi Channel, through which a significant portion of Japan's energy imports transit. Japan imports nearly all of its oil. Those tankers pass through these waters. That is not an abstract strategic interest. That is the Japanese economy. For the Philippines, the urgency is more immediate. Chinese Coast Guard vessels have repeatedly confronted Filipino boats near disputed reefs in the South China Sea. There have been water cannon incidents. There have been collisions. Filipino sailors have been injured. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has previously expressed concern about the some 190,000 Filipino residents in Taiwan should conflict occur. The stakes for Manila are not theoretical. Over the past 2 years, the Philippines has concluded or advanced visiting forces agreements with New Zealand, Canada, and Australia, with Canada's agreement explicitly presented as a response to rising tensions in the South China Sea. A web is forming. The Philippines is no longer just America's treaty ally in the region. It is becoming a hub, a country around which a new constellation of security relationships is quietly consolidating. According to the Center for a New American Security, enhanced coordination on military training, maritime patrolling, intelligence sharing, infrastructure development, and logistics will better prepare the United States, Japan, and the Philippines for a potential military contingency in the region. That phrase, potential military contingency, is Washington's diplomatic vocabulary for something more direct. It means war. The planning is already underway. Japan's official security assistance program, launched in 2023, dispenses security aid to 5 countries in Southeast Asia, including the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and East Timor. According to reports, approximately $116 million has been budgeted in fiscal 2026, a 125% increase compared to the previous year's budget, which was itself a 60% increase. The numbers are still modest relative to the scale of the challenge, but the trajectory is unmistakable. Beijing is watching all of this, and it is not quiet about what it sees. A Chinese military affairs expert speaking to state media argued that the Philippines is playing with fire by introducing external forces into the South China Sea, and that Japan's real aim in exporting destroyers is to break through the constraints of its peace constitution and openly export weapons abroad. According to reports, China urged Japan to act prudently in military and security affairs and to adhere to the path of peaceful development, with the Chinese Foreign Ministry stating that defense cooperation between countries must not target any third party. That framing that this alliance targets China is precisely what Tokyo and Manila dispute. Both governments describe their cooperation as defensive. Both say they oppose any unilateral change to the status quo by force. Both have reiterated opposition to unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force in the South China Sea and East China Sea. The language is measured, the intent is clear. What is also clear is that Beijing's own behavior has been the accelerant here. Every water cannon fired at a Filipino supply boat, every Chinese Coast Guard vessel that has shadowed a Japanese patrol, every incursion into contested waters, each of those incidents has pushed Manila and Tokyo closer together. China has, in an important sense, authored this alliance through its own actions. Japanese ambassador to the Philippines, Indo-Pacific, has suggested that the self-defense forces involvement could expand further in the future, describing deeper participation as a natural development given the growing security cooperation between the two countries. That phrase, natural development, is doing a lot of work. What looks natural from Tokyo's perspective is being felt very differently in Beijing. According to defense analysts, Balikatan 2026's activities are described as a prelude for what is to come for the evolving Japan-Philippines partnership. A prelude, that word suggests that. What we are watching now is not the story. It is only the opening chapter. The question for the region is whether this buildup deters conflict or edges toward it. History offers arguments on both sides. Deterrence has prevented wars, but arms buildups have also triggered the very confrontations they were meant to prevent. The Indo-Pacific in 2026 is walking that line very carefully, and so far nobody has fallen. What we can say with confidence is this: the old post-war order in Asia, in which Japan stayed home, the Philippines leaned on Washington, and the South China Sea simmered without boiling, is over. A new order is being assembled, agreement by agreement, destroyer by destroyer, soldier by soldier on a Philippine training ground. Where that order leads depends on choices that are still being made. So here is the question I want to leave with you. Japan has spent 80 years defined by pacifism, shaped by the memory of what it did and what was done to it. As it steps back, into the role of a regional military power, even defensively, does that history make it more trustworthy to its neighbors? Or does it make them more nervous? Let us know what you think in the comments below.